Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to a live edition of the Landlord Lens. Well, with landlords, we can see you right in front of us. Normally we do this as a live webinar, and it's myself, Vanessa from Property Tribes, full-time residential landlord and co-founder of Property Tribes, and my partner in crime, Ben Beadle, who is CEO of the NRLA. And we've been doing this about 2 years now. And what we do is that Ben and I, just before we go on air, we look at the trending topics on Property Tribes. It's basically sorted by an algorithm to determine the topics that are most of interest to landlords, and it updates every 3 hours. So we like these discussions because they're very, very up to date, they're very topical, and they're what landlords are interested in at this particular moment in time. So before we get going, Ben, I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up about something. I've actually been quite unwell recently, and I've been suffering from a virus. I don't know if you've heard of it because it's it's happening in the landlord community, but it's called the RRBF. And that translates as the Renters Reform Bill Fatigue. So Ben, it's been going on so long, nobody laughed. I thought that was funny. Anyway, so seriously, it's coming back into the Commons next Wednesday. It keeps coming and going and coming and going, and we're always talking about it. Where are we at now?
Well, folks, it's very much like the hokey cokey. Is it in? Is it out? Shake it all about. What we have now is a date for the next stage, and something for those of you that were at my earlier presentation where I talked through the changes and the amendments and so forth. I say that this is good news. I know that not everybody shares this view, but I think it will be good news in the longer term if the bill gets across the line with the amendments that we have seen. So what you can expect to see is a debate on Wednesday in the Commons, and there's lots of kind of media stuff lined up. I don't think I'll be breaching confidences to say that Minister Jacob Young will be joining me on a webinar on Tuesday evening at 5:30 to discuss some of these things and to set out very clearly how responsible landlords have nothing to fear from the Renters Reform Bill. I'll believe it when I see it, but I'm very pleased to see some of the amendments that are forthcoming that I do think will, in the most part, give landlords confidence around the direction of travel. It's a year since it was made its first appearance. It's over 5 years since it was kind of announced by Theresa May, of all people. So it's been hanging around like a bad smell, and I think what I would say to you is the industry needs certainty, doesn't it? I often kind of liken things to going to see my in-laws. The fear of seeing my in-laws is much worse often than the reality when I get there, and I hope that that's going to be the same when it comes to renters reform. The worry, the uncertainty, is it happening, is it not happening? And of course, it may still not happen. There's a whole raft of things that could play out, but for now it's moving Wednesday back in Parliament, and we'll be at the forefront to make sure that the bill works for responsible landlords and their tenants, because this isn't a culture war. It doesn't need to be a culture war. I know it's being played out as being a culture war, but I don't buy that argument. The amendments that are coming forward are not a landlord's charter. They are sensible modifications that will give landlords confidence and renters confidence that properties will still be there, because that's of course what they need.
Well, one of the reasons that it has taken so long is that there have been so many tweaks and amendments, and actually that's positive, isn't it, Ben? Because in the last few months we have had some amendments come through that the NRLA has largely been behind, that have made it more palatable to the landlord community. Is there still the issue of whether it will be brought in if the court system hasn't been reformed, or where's goog at with that?
Well, we've been doing a lot of campaigning, Vanessa, to make sure that these amendments did get brought forward. not the only ones, but our friends on the backbenches also have had a large part to play. And that's right, because what was being proposed was a periodic tenancy from day one. Well, we've now managed to move that to a far more sensible arrangement where it will be an initial period of 4 months before tenants can give 2 months' notice. And that mirrors what landlords will have to do if they wish to sell or move back into the property. But also, it takes into account some really important things from a renter's perspective. If you get loads of churn, you get loads of cost. If you get loads of cost, it costs more. It costs more for the end consumer. And so, there will be people out there that balk at the idea of an initial kind of 6 month period. But I say it's a very, very sensible move to give landlords confidence and to give tenants the comfort that they need as well. As far as court reform is concerned, what I'm very pleased to see is in the latest 108 pages of amendments that were published yesterday, there is a commitment to an 18-month review of the effectiveness of of what's being proposed, and the readiness of the courts that will take place after 18 months. And that's important because it's in the bill, it's a commitment. Yes, there is a test. Yes, you can be very cynical about how that works. But it is right that the courts are ready to, for this new system. And it is important because it will take primary legislation to remove it if it continues in its current form. And so, as it stands, it will be made applicable to new tenancies with a 6-month lead-in period after royal assent, but it won't be made retrospective until there has been a proper review of all of these changes. I say that's the right thing, but it's also very, very important given that we could potentially have a change in government. It will be quite tricky to change that in the bill. You'd have to bring primary legislation to change it, as I understand it. And so even if there is a change in government with a different agenda, that will still be there.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad that we have you and the NRLA legal team to look through all those hundreds of pages of amendments, because I know that my eyes would probably glaze over if I had to do it. So it's good that you've got eyes on it. We're going to move on now to our first trending topic, which is number 1 on the list there in the trending topic discussions, and it is Nick Bano, landlords should be humiliated. And this discussion, which is rather heated, as you might imagine, in a landlord community, was born out of a housing lawyer by the name of Nick Bano, who has done an interview with Politics Joe on YouTube to promote his new book, funnily enough. And he's extremely controversial in his views. He said landlords are participating in an immensely harmful economic system. He said we've got to make it embarrassing to be a landlord again, and that landlords should be humiliated out of existence. Now, Ben, it's clearly a clickbait, topic to get people engaged, and I sent it to you yesterday. I know you're already aware of it. What's your view on Mr. Bano?
It's bollocks. Well, it is. Look, a lot of people will criticise, me and the NRLA for the stances that we take about, when renter groups come out with ridiculous surveys or whatever. I tend not to get too excited about these things, to be honest with you. I can tell you that we are arranging a debate between myself and Nick, a date to be arranged. That's being facilitated by the Daily Telegraph, and I look forward to sensibly putting across our argument. I'm not going to get into a slanging match with the guy. I'm sure he's a very sensible guy. He has a different view of the world. He's entitled to his view of the world. if I think it's a steaming pile of horse crap, then that's fine. He probably thinks my view is a steaming pile of horse crap. All I would say in addition is that we're living in quite a divisive world where we have to be careful not to give too much ground and too much airtime to extremists, people with very, very extreme views. And I'm reading his book. I have bought his book. I have. I was reading it in Hyde Park last week. I haven't finished it yet, but I am reading it. His views are not my views. I also don't think that they are the majority view of the world. He has a particular viewpoint that I don't share. I'm really not going to get into the detail around it because, as you say, it is clickbait, and I think your average man on the Clapham omnibus would probably disagree. And also, it's not going to happen. We're here to stay. I'm not scared of being a landlord. I'm proud to be a landlord and look after my tenants. And I know, people in the audience, people that come to this event, people that are members of the NRLA take great pride in looking after their tenants. We mustn't forget that during COVID, when rents went down, we did a YouGov poll of renters to ask whether they had asked for any support from their landlord, for example. Over 80% replied in the affirmative to say that the landlord had reduced the rent, they had come up with a payment holiday, they had let them out of their contract, they had done all of these things. Yep. And you know what? That's probably right. We want to look after our tenants, but we won't get anywhere in this world if we have such divisive and unpalatable views such as this. I'm a great believer that, generally speaking, what's good for landlords is good for renters, and you run the risk of alienating people with these extreme views. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, I think it is interesting if somebody has a very extreme view, because people that oppose that view obviously put their opinion forward. And actually, Ben, one positive thing that can come out of it is it does tease out the issues, and it can help bring clarity to the topic that's being discussed. And what I felt quite heartened about was when I looked, there were over 1,500 comments on the YouTube video, and they were largely against Mr. Bano's views. And it was actually quite refreshing, because typically we do see a lot of anti-landlord rhetoric, don't we? So it's quite nice to see people actually opposing his view with reasoned arguments.
Yeah, I do think that's right, but I also think that we are, particularly our politics at the moment. Politics is extremely, it feels to be as divisive as it's ever been, and whether we like it or not, there are still people that would like us kind of out of existence. I mean, can you imagine if I came out and said that I want tenants to be humiliated? I mean, can you imagine?
It's terrible.
So, I don't speak in those terms, and nor should we. But I think what it does, for me, it shows a couple of things. One, it shows how dangerous ideologies can be. And actually what we need in this world is far more pragmatism rather than failed sort of ideologies about what a perception of a property owner or a landlord is. But it also, for me, shows that I think there's real anger out there. There's real anger around cost of living. There's real anger about increased rents. There's real jealousy that people can't get on the housing ladder. These are all political choices. And so rather than be very angry to the people that are providing homes, actually we should be far more collaborative in our desire to want to hold government to account. Take local housing allowance that's routinely been frozen. Actually, what government are doing, I know there was a gesture in the in the Chancellor's recent budget. But that's a deliberate political decision that says, you know what, the most vulnerable in society, we're gonna pause their rents for the last 4 years at a time we've got cost of living, at a time that rents are rising, and at the same time we're going to make life really difficult for landlords by taxing the pants off them and over-regulating them. Somewhere within that there's a sweet spot, and we haven't found it yet. But pragmatism will bring a sweet spot. Ideology will bring conflict.
Well, very well said. And also, I think the other thing I noticed about the interview was that Mr. Bano didn't really come up with any solutions either, because who is going to provide private sector accommodation if landlords were humiliated out of existence because there sure isn't enough social housing, is there?
You're right, and I was just going to say that, you know, I think a lot of we're putting a lot of eggs in one basket when it comes to social housing. So the idea that, you know, the state's going to provide, that's his argument. And don't get me wrong, you know, I think where we are with social housing is the root cause of why we have high rents and general dissatisfaction and waiting lists and all of that, you know, lots of people in temporary accommodation and all of that. But let's not pretend that social housing providers are any better than an individual landlord. I was reading a post from Mick Roberts, a landlord in Nottingham, who pointed out to me that Nottingham Council or local authority haven't inspected their properties for 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
I know that we don't want to, we could argue that we're in a glass house and throwing stones, but let's not pretend that a big institutional landlord or a big social housing provider is in some way better than your individual landlord with 1, 2 or 3 properties. And I think people are beginning to realise that, not just because of our Bishak with the mould problems that contributed to that poor boy's death, but also that people felt, or the family felt, very powerless to be able to exercise their rights.
Yeah.
What we know in the private rented sector is there are significant rules and regulations that landlords need to comply with, and we're back to the enforcement of that. We mustn't tarnish everybody with the same brush, and we mustn't try and divide what is a very, very divided world.
No, I agree 100%. What should we have a look at?
What have we got?
Adjusting your mindset for good debt. That's a very, very, very long discussion, and it was started by somebody who has to date just invested in property in an unencumbered fashion without mortgages, and he was really struggling to come to terms with taking out mortgages and leverage. He understood, you know, how brilliant it is, but he felt in his own mind really uncomfortable about how to come to terms with that. And I know that when I started out, actually, Ben, I actually felt like that myself in the very early days. And this member came to the community and said, how do you deal with being millions in debt? And it's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah, it is. And when I bought my first investment property, I remember telling my dad that I was buying a second property. And my dad, of a certain age, who remembers, you know, interest rates at 15, 16, 17% or whatever they were. And I remember the sheer look of horror in his face when I said I was getting another mortgage. How are you doing that? And then I went on to buy another one, and then I went on to buy another one. And actually, I mean, for me, it wasn't that I didn't really think about it. It was more that, you know, I'd put in a decent deposit. I was comfortable with the risk. I had my mitigation. I'd fixed my mortgage. I mean, luckily everything's kind of worked out, touch wood, and I don't have too many years left on the mortgage to be able to pay down. But it is funny, that kind of mindset. And, you know, I remember looking at my credit rating and thinking, well, that's a really big figure of how much I owe. Never really, you know, never really thought about it. But the older you get, the more it goes down. So, you know, there you go. It's just interesting how people kind of perceive that. And, yeah, my parents thought I was incredibly risky when I was buying my investment properties. But yeah, I'm still here to tell the tale. But you've got to be comfortable and you've got to do your due diligence, haven't
Yeah,
you?
you have. I would also say I think it's about education and understanding how to use leverage. And the NRLA has a Fundamentals of Property Investing course that would help you understand that, because actually the true way to wealth in buy-to-let property is to use buy-to-let mortgages. And you don't have to go to the max loan to value of 75% if you don't want to. You can maybe start at 50% if that feels right for you. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about investing in property, is we can tailor it so much to our individual goals and our risk threshold and how much money we have, how much time we have. That's one of the best things about it.
Yeah, I agree with that, but it's also about having your wits about you around the external environment as well. You know, who would have thought we would have seen such a dramatic change with interest rates, for example? I don't think anybody thought they were going to stay as they were for a long period of time, but I don't think many people thought they were just going to spike in the way that they did. And then if you look at the kind of the backdrop of what we were talking about earlier, or in the earlier session, around changing politics and the reform therein, they're all things that are outside of your control in a roundabout sort of way, that is another external factor that you're going to have to safeguard yourself against and be prepared to adapt. And we see that through rental reform. You know, things will be arguably more difficult for landlords. Are they going to be impossible? No. But are you guys going to have the appetite to continue investing and staying in the market? Well, that will depend on your individual circumstances. And that, again, is the point that we're making to politicians and so forth, that like us or loathe us, it's really important that investors such as you guys have confidence in the changes that are coming down the track. And why, yes, we appreciate all of the optics around Section 21 and property condition and stuff like that. However, you've got to bring people along with you, and that's really what we're trying to do with some of the amendments that you see and the sort of lobbying activity as well.
Okay. Well, we'll just grab one more topic because we're just going to leave 5 minutes for questions for Ben at the end, or myself if you've got a question for me. This was an interesting one, Ben, theft while the buy-to-let property was empty. What was interesting about it is this poor guy had a void property and he had massive asset theft. He had the boiler, all the pipes, everything stolen from within the property, but he hadn't informed his insurer that the property was empty, and he was very concerned that he wouldn't be covered. And I think why I chose this one, Ben, is because the devil is always in the detail in property. And when you hear these very exciting headlines about be a millionaire in in a year with no money and no effort and passive income, it's not like that at all. There are snafus and traps every day to catch you out that could cause financial loss. And we are legally obliged to provide a safe and compliant home for our tenants, and we want them to be safe and healthy in their properties. So, just those little details and knowing this important information is so critical to your business.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it just sort of reinforces, I think, little things like that you may not have thought about come back and bite you on the bum, right?
Big time.
And what I would say, you mentioned kind of the whole get rich quick, and actually, I'm preaching to the converted, I'm sure, but this sort of stuff doesn't exist. This is about hard work. It's about knowing your audience. It's about reading up and swatting up on the market, on the changing conditions. It's about having awareness, and you can't learn that by paying somebody 20 grand and going on a one-day course or whatever. It relies on much more than that, and I think that is another sorry tale, isn't it? That particular example. I mean, is it bad luck, or is should they have been a bit more diligent? Probably the both of them. I would suggest, but it does just show that it's risk and reward. And the risk when they hit you hurt far more than the marginal gain that you might get with the reward of renting your property.
Yeah. Well, as a landlord, you definitely want to be in prevention mode. It's a lot less stressful, a lot less money, a lot less hassle than if something goes wrong and you have to cure it. If that happens, then it can be a lot more expensive and a lot more stressful. You know, it's so important to be educated. So I commend everybody here today for coming to increase your knowledge about landlord issues, because it's risk mitigation essentially, and it's just absolutely vital to do so. And Ben, I did attend one of these wealth creation seminars many years ago, and I listened very carefully to hear a very important word. And in the 7 hours I was in the room, I never heard the word once. It was the word tenant. And that is what bothers me about it, because the tenant is your client. They're at the heart of your business. If you don't look after them or serve them correctly, then you are not going to have a successful business. So we've got 5 minutes left for questions. Does anybody want to be brave and ask a question or have something?
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. There you go. So on the leasehold reform bill that's kind of going through at the moment, that's ahead of the game when it compares to the renters reform bill. But there's a whole lot to work out. There's a lot of concern about marriage value.
The article in the Telegraph.
Yes, indeed. And there are, I think, sit tight is all I can say. For our members, it's much more about rental reform than it is about leasehold and freehold reform. But we are talking to the Minister and his team about some changes that we would like to see. So I've got an article out. I won't go into massive detail, but there is an article on the NRLA website about the latest state of play that I'd encourage people to have a little look at, because it is a big issue. It is a big issue. And I understand what they want to do, but you know, you've had sort of charities come out and say, well, we're going to be really adversely affected by some of these changes. It isn't quite as black and white, even though it's with the best of intentions. So check out the NRLA site for more detail on that.
Awesome. Well, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Just thank you to everybody who's joined us here on a live recording of the Landlord Lens. If you're not a member of Property Tribes, it's free to join. It's a very active discussion forum. We talk about every aspect of property investment, and you'll see it's all divided into categories, so you can really niche down on information. And also the NRLA have a stand here. If you join during the show, you get a discount. So if you're not a member, me being a member myself for 15 years, I can tell you it's a great thing, a great tool to have in your toolbox to help you be a responsible landlord. So that's it. Thank you everybody. Thank you to Ben, and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.